This is a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive.
It's another team season preview video. 32 teams in 32 days. Ian Cameron, Alex B. Smith, and Dana Lane. And here in this video, we are talking about the Seattle Kraken, a team that disappointed certainly Alex and I last year, who came on this show in the summer last season thinking that futures price for Seattle, a team that was one win away from the conference finals the previous season, losing in 7 to the Dallas Stars, beating Colorado in the first round that year. We thought maybe, hey, 50, 60 to 1 to win the cup was great value, but didn't even make the playoffs. A very disappointing season last year for the Seattle Kraken, a season that costs Dave Haxtell his job, and now brought in, after doing a phenomenal job in the American Hockey League the last 2 years with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, the affiliate of the Seattle Kraken, Dan Bylsma, back in the National Hockey League, Stanley Cup winner many years ago with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but he had Sidney Crosby, he had Evgeny Malkin, he had Chris Letang, he had Marc-Andre Fleury, all in their prime. Then he went to Buffalo, took over the Sabres, and not the same success there, far from it, for Dan Bylsma in Buffalo. Now he gets a third shot in the NHL as head coach of the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, we have to mention, too, on his coaching staff, as she was in Coachella Valley, Jessica Campbell becoming the first actual coach behind the bench, female coach behind the bench of an NHL team in any capacity. So congratulations to her. Groundbreaking for sure, and well-deserved. Obviously worked hard to get to this level and did a great job on Bylsma's staff in Coachella Valley. Jessica Campbell will be part of the Seattle staff as well as an assistant. When you look at the roster and you look at Seattle, particularly last year, I think there were multiple issues with Seattle. They were actually still, believe it or not, and it's not surprising, Haxtell was always someone that wanted this team to be good defensively. Last year, they were 8th, believe it or not, in the NHL in goals against per game. Not bad at all. A top 10 defensive team, and yet somehow they still ended up missing the playoffs last season. But you look at offensively, that's where the issues were. 2.61 goals per game. There's only 3 teams, Anaheim, San Jose, Chicago. Pretty bad seasons, all 3 of them last year, that scored fewer goals per game than the Seattle Kraken. So it was actually a above average defensive team. It was a well below average offensive team. And this year, Dan Bylsma is going to look to change that, because I think the thing you take away from the addition of Bylsma as the head coach is they're going to play faster, transition the puck up the ice quickly. He won't be scared to allow his defensemen to pinch at the blue line to keep plays alive, keep pucks alive in the offensive zone. That's always been a staple of the Coachella Valley teams. Very aggressive, mindset offensively, willing to take some chances. So definitely it's the style that would think will give Seattle a chance to be an improved offensive team this year. But you're going to need the personnel to put the biscuit in the basket. It's not just all, well, the system's going to be more up-tempo, and you're going to look to be a better offensive team and have the defensemen jump into the play more. You got to eventually have guys that can finish. And when you look at last year for the Seattle Kraken, they had Jared McCann, but Jordan Eberle was up and down. It was a disappointing sophomore season for Matty Beniers, a guy that 2 years ago had a big offensive season, and then in his second year, a big decline in his numbers last year, where he went from 2 years ago, a guy that had 24 goals, 33 assists, 57 points in 80 games, just 37 points and 15 goals in 77 games for Matty Beniers this past season. But he gets rewarded. He gets the contract extension in the offseason, and I actually think this is a good thing for him. He gets the money. I think he's going to be a little more relaxed, a little more comfortable. That's taken care of. And I believe in the talent that Matty Beniers has to have a bounce-back season here in year 3 offensively with the Seattle Kraken. What are you going to get from Burakovsky? A gifted offensive player, but sub-50 games played, back-to-back seasons due to injury. So you need him to be obviously able to stay healthy, and that's going to be a critical component. Eeli Tolvanen in flashes has pumped in a little offense for this team. I like Oliver Bjorkstrand's game too, and he's played pretty well offensively for Seattle, but again, someone that had a season marred by injury a little bit. I think there's upside with Ty Cartier. I love the addition of Chandler Stevenson. I know Dana's very familiar with him, watching him up close and personal there with the Golden Knights. Nice addition there to really insulate and strengthen and deepen that center ice position for the Seattle Kraken. Yanni Gord's just a bull in a china shop, just every single shift when he's out there. So you talk about diligent on the forecheck, hard worker, plays that rugged style of game. You can't have too many of those players. There's two players that stand out that are going to help Dan Bylsma realize the potential of this team to be an improved offensive team, not just the system they're going to employ, but it's going to be Beniers having a bounce back year for the Kraken. And the other one that stands out to me is Shane Wright. We're waiting on Shane Wright. This is someone that's taken a very long time to develop. It's been, obviously he got picked lower in the draft than people thought. He wasn't ready initially to be in the NHL. He's had to go down to the American Hockey League, learn how to be a pro, learn how to be consistent at both ends of the ice on a night in, night out basis. And he went through the rigors of being in Coachella Valley. And we saw improvement, and to the point where he got that late season call up with Seattle in the regular season last year, and it looked like a different Shane Wright. It finally looked like a Shane Wright that had confidence again offensively. He made an impact. I know Alex and I and a lot of us on the Ice Guys show, we got involved with Shane Wright, like plus big prices to score goals, because we saw the improvement he looked like he had made offensively that last stint and tour of duty he had with Seattle. Now that he's probably going to be on this main Seattle roster this season, more likely he'll make the team. Can he do it for 82 games on a consistent night in and night out basis? But if he can, that's certainly going to make Seattle a better offensive team as well coming into this season. I think when you look, and Ty Cartier is someone to keep an eye on. He's shown some offensive flash as well. Can he take another step forward for them? On the blue line, you've obviously got Adam Larson, who just got re-upped for 4 more years at $21 million. Vince Dunn beside him, who has shown certainly capabilities of being a very good offensive-minded defenseman for this team. We'll see if he can carry that over into this year. You've got Jamie Oleksiak. They really like Riker Evans. That's someone you're going to want to keep an eye on this year, a young player that could get better for them. Will Borgen, more of a stay-at-home defenseman. Josh Mahura brought in from the Panthers for a little bit of depth, as is Brandon Montour, who is the big free agent signing on the blue line for the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, look, has had a great couple of years in Florida. Not so much last year, and especially in the playoffs, didn't really have that impact that he did for Florida 2 years ago when they went to the Stanley Cup final and lost to Vegas. Thought it was a little bit of a step back for him in his playoff performance this year, even though Florida won the Cup this year. But it's still a nice ad for the Seattle Kraken. I like that he's on the blue line. You could argue they overpaid. I think they did. But nevertheless, it's a good addition for the Seattle Kraken on the blue line. And then in goal, I don't think it's too much of a worry. Philip Grubauer, he is what he is at this point. You got to pace his games. He's an older player now. And especially when you've seen Joey Decord in a lot of glimpses last year play above average in net, show capability to be maybe a guy that you can rely on as potentially a number one. I still need to see more from Joey Decord. I'm not quite there yet to say, yeah, surefire number one goalie of the future for the Seattle Kraken. But boy, I really liked the way he improved last year. And I think he is going to share more of a 1A, 1B type deal in net this year with Philip Grubauer, with that duo in between the pipes for the Kraken of Grubauer and Decord. So, look, I think they're going to be a little bit improved for sure. I'm a little bit gun shy because of the fact I was so bullish on them at the price they were last year. They let me down greatly, but it's going to be a breath of fresh air, new coaching staff. They're going to try to be more creative offensively. Will it be at the expense of their defense? And is the question, because as I said, they were a top 10 defensive team last year. Does that maybe fall down a little bit because you're trying to be so much more aggressive and offensively and improve on your goals for per game? That's going to end up being the question. But definitely overs in Seattle games, I think, make a lot of sense. They're going to definitely be trying to score more goals. They're playing that style that could also leave them a little bit more vulnerable at the defensive end of the ice. I'll look to back Seattle in spots. The problem with saying for sure they're back in the playoffs this year is just the way it shakes out in the Pacific Division and the Western Conference overall. It's not going to be an easy pathway. I think they'll be improved offensively, but I also think the such focus on playing faster and taking more chances offensively could be at the detriment of the Seattle Kraken defensively. So we'll wait and see how that goes. I still think there'll be good spots to bet on them. There'll be improvement. How much improvement is the question. More than anything, the stance that I'm taking into the season more than anything with Seattle is overs with their game totals. I think they'll play more of an over type of style this year in their regular season games. Alex, Seattle Kraken.
It's been interesting watching Seattle. Of course, they're going through the normal motions that an expansion franchise goes through. They had to struggle in the first year. bounce back and have a great second year, make the playoffs, and then kind of make a regression. Now they've made a change with their coaching. But having Bausma coming up from the AHL team where they had 2 successful seasons, a win away in each of the years of coming from a Calder Cup championship, getting 2 Western Conference titles, building that core nucleus of these younger players that are going to be playing over the next 4 to 5 years with this Kraken team. I like the idea and the pace that they have working right now, but they need an identity as far as what they're going to do on the ice. They're talking about being a faster team, a more open offensive team, but we have to see that kind of come to fruition in the NHL level. And the AHL level was fine, and I'm curious to see how their power play reacts. That's where you mentioned Jessica Campbell being in there, along with Bob Woods, who comes over, spent many years with the Minnesota Wild, which kind of sets off an alarm with me because you're talking about Minnesota Wild and power play. They were a team that had all the talent in the world on the power play, but could not execute properly more often than not over those years. So that's something to kind of keep in mind and kind of keep an eye on with this team progressing offensively. On the back end, like you said, Grubauer is a solid goaltender, but I think Joey Daccord could really push him to possibly be, competing for that number 1 spot, to where, like I said, that's a good tandem to have a 1A, 1B system. If they can emerge and have a season that we saw a couple of years ago, like Lena Solmark and Jeremy Swayman, that would be fantastic. That would be a huge boost for Seattle. I think that's obviously a very high ceiling.
Just spare us the cornball hugs after every game. That's all I ask. That's all
I don't know if they're as good of friends in this situation, but I do think we will see. That's the ceiling. That's the goal that I think Seattle would like to get from those 2 guys. If they can have something that works in that kind of a pairing, then that would be a giant plus rather than a negative for Seattle. And the Blue Liners, like I said, Brandon Montour is a good person to bring over. Not necessarily crazy about the long term or the pricing of the contract, but I think he's a solid piece to add. I like the grit that this team kind of has. Like I said, they just have to find and find their place, figure out what their identity is. But I like what's growing. I like some of the pieces of players. I like Shane Wright. I think Jared McCann had the big breakout year, and that's somebody I'll mention in futures in a little bit. But I think this team, they're just a couple pieces away, and they're a couple of years of maturity away from being a real dominant team in the West. But they just got to figure a few more things out.
All right, Dana, what do you think for Seattle this upcoming season?
I don't know, Ian. I think if a guy like Robin Leonard had a few more hugs, things would be a little bit different. So I like the cornball hugs a little bit, and I think Robin does need a little bit of hug and maybe a little less time with the Snakes. But anyway, look, I think Bausma coming in, and you guys have talked about it, he wants to speed up the tempo, and that's certainly going to take commitment. But do you guys think these are the players that are going to implement the style that he wants? And I just don't see it. I mean, we look at who offensively are we worried about right now besides, Jared McCann, right? I mean, that's who we're worried about right now offensively. I don't see, and there's so many of these teams where you go, if this and if that, but there's not any, hey, we definitely know they are one of the top 3 or top 6. They're one of the best in the league, best units in the league. That's just, we can't say that with Seattle. And this is why I don't think we're going to see this massive jump, because I think he's going to try to implement a system with players that are not ready to play what he wants. I mean, this takes commitment. That's not only takes commitment. We talk about up-tempo styles. We never really think about what that means for the defenseman. And it takes not only a commitment, it takes discipline as well. And look, I watched a lot of Seattle games last year, and there were times where there was defensive breakdowns as really as good as they were overall numerically. There was always these little microcosms where you're like, and that really prevents you from taking that next step. They were horrible as an underdog last year. They've been horrible as an underdog for the last 3 years. And where they're really bad is as a home underdog, where they have to start winning some of these games. They're minus 25 units over the last 3 seasons. And I think the Ducks and the Sharks are the only teams that are worse than them as a home underdog, and they're not beating the teams. They're not even coming close to beating, Vegas and Edmonton and Vancouver and LA. I think they lost 17 of 20 against those teams. I think they're a long way away, and I think Bausma is a nice start and a good direction. But man, we have seen so many players take a step back. We saw Jaden Schwartz take a 10-point step back from where he was 2 years ago. We have these contracts, and we just got through talking about this. We have these contracts that are just they're not a representation of what you should be getting out of these players. Yanni Gourde's contract at $5.2 million to score 11 goals on the third line. This is just, that is not creating the culture that you want there. You're creating a culture of, yeah, we're going to pay you. And by the way, there is no expectation. There is expectation for sure because it comes out of your mouth, but there's no real expectation. Like Chandler Stevenson, when he played in Vegas, there was real expectation to not only get to the playoffs, but to go deep into the playoffs. Now, how do you think he's going to respond? I mean, he's a heck of a player for sure. But how do you think he's going to respond to go into an organization where that just is not there? And that's not something you can make up. That's not something you can speak into existence. That's just something that is there, and it's an intangible. And I don't think it's there in Seattle. We see a ton of guys with horrific contracts, including maybe Chandler Stevenson, who's getting over $6 million, and he's really at best a 15 to 20 guy for a organization that needs him to be 25-30. They need 25-30s all over the place. And Chandler Stevenson is nice. He comes with a nice pedigree, 4-year deal. That's a lot. And I just think Ron Francis, at sometimes he was criticizing in Carolina for not making a big deal and pushing them over to the top. And I think he gets to Seattle and he's making these crazy contracts. I mean, Beniers is making $7.5 million and he's got 15 goals. You know who's not making $7.5 million in the NFL? Or in the NHL? Clayton Keller's not making 7.5. Brock Besser's not making 7.5, or it wasn't last year. I mean, these are guys that are 33, 40 goal scorers that are not making 7.5, and they're handing out ridiculous contracts for a team that is not going to exceed. They need multiple guys to exceed expectations. Yes, strong in net for sure. I love their duo in net, and I think that's going to keep them in a lot of games. But I just do not see these guys jumping up and being 6 million and 7 million and 7.5 million producers like Seattle needs to be. I think there's a little bit of a culture problem there, and if they don't get off to a good start, I think it's really going to be a long season in Seattle.
But I gotta say this though, I think you're really underestimating just how bad offensively Dave Hackstall and that crew were, especially in the second half of that season. I don't think it was all personnel. It was a lot of that was coaching and just schematics. They did not take the shooting. The shooting charts every night looked like a blind man playing darts. They were shooting from all over the place. They had no rhyme or reason to how they had no.
They weren't generating enough high danger. Simple. Period.
Not at all. So I think that's going to increase a lot of the, and that's why I'm looking at player props with this team. I think we're going to see a big boost from several players on this team. They're not going to necessarily be, like you said, we're not going to have these guys play to the level of the money they're making. But I think there's a few guys in this roster who can take some really big leaps, and I think it's because of the fact that they have a coach and a coaching staff that now will have an emphasis more on offense, and we just see more goals naturally come from this group. Yeah, more offensive creativity.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then, Alex, and it's a good point. Well, let me ask you this: and we're talking about whether a team is. I'm not talking about from a prop angle. I'm talking about whether this team is going to take a step forward and be in a significant presence in the Western Conference, and to be a significant presence. And if we're using Edmonton and Dallas and Vegas and Vancouver as our litmus test, these are teams that have 30, 35, 40 goal scorers. And so when we're just talking about whether this team is going to push themselves up even into the middle of the pack, I don't know where those kind of guys are coming from, even in a system that is more up tempo. I mean, they might get to the point where they're playing up tempo and they're getting caught being aggressive, and they're like, yeah, let's dial that back, which is why I said maybe these are not the guys that are eventually going to implement Bielema's system.
Oh, sure, yeah, and I believe it would be fine tuned and get better over time. Like I said, there has to be other people. Like I said, as contracts expire, as guys get older, guys will be flushed out, and we'll see the system be fine tuned. But I think there's a big jump right away just off of the fact that you have someone who's competent offensively, where there's someone who was incompetent offensively last year behind the bench. I think that jump is enough to where
Okay.
I can bet on Seattle more in games. I could look at some player props on a nightly basis and from a future standpoint where I couldn't do that with Seattle last year.
So what do you expect out of Jaden Schwartz?
I expect him to be about a 45 point guy. I think he's a guy who can, the biggest jump I have, and I'll just talk about it now, Jared McCann. I like Jared McCann to at least get 80 or more points this season.
Jaden Schwartz is a guy that had 50-plus points 3 or 4 seasons in St. Louis. The problem was that was a long time ago. He was younger then, and injuries have accrued. I mean, the last year was just 30 points and only 62 games from him. Yeah. But again, product now of an increased emphasis on offense. Here's the thing with the Seattle, because if McCann is good but not great, that's an issue. He's going to have to be great, McCann. There's no doubt about that. Right. Eberle's got to be a lot better offensively. What if Beniers, it's not a sophomore slump. It triggers over into year 3 as well, and his offense is not as good. What if Shane Wright doesn't make the jump I think he's capable of? What if Ty Cartier is not the offensive guy he showed in flashes last year? Then these offensive issues will persist, regardless of the system, regardless of the coaching staff for the Seattle Kraken. But I'm looking at it as the coaching staff will put this personnel into better positions to score goals, that the personnel does have room to improve. I can expect a better season from Beniers in year 3 with a new contract at his whim. Eberle's capable of better. What if Burakovsky and Bjorkstrand don't get hurt this year, stay healthy? That's going to help them offensively. Those are good offensive players if they stay healthy, but they have to. And Cartier stepping up. And another thing, too, and this is to what Dana said about the personnel concerns, are these guys capable finishers, capable to put pucks in net? We have seen this before, too. Even if they increase the high danger chance, let's say they go up in terms of high danger chances generated. I have no doubt they will, Seattle. They will generate more chances. You've still got to put the puck in the freaking net. And we have seen instances where teams year in and year out in this league, the high danger chances are off the chart. They're generating them night in, night out, consistently, getting high danger chances, but the goals for don't reflect it. And that probably is maybe a concern I would have with Seattle. That yes, they'll probably generate more chances, and especially of the high danger variety, but will the finish be there? Or Eberle, Beniers off a slump season, a sophomore slump. Cartier can take a leap. Can Wright take a consistent leap offensively to finish those high danger looks that they probably will get more of this year as a team under Bylsma compared to Hackstall? But can the personnel finish those chances? Because we've seen this, and we have talked about this, Dana, Alex, and I on the show. There's instances of teams, well, wait a minute, all the shots, all the high danger chances, they're top 5 in the league. Well, but they're bottom 10 in goals. And it's because they're just not finishing, and it's because the players they've got on the roster are not clinical, surgical enough to finish the chances. That's your concern here with Seattle.
And if you think they're going to improve, that's fine. But so if I took that question back for a second and I said, well, let me throw it at it this way to you. Do you think they're a playoff team? And then if you say yes, well, that's fine. That's a good stance to be on. But if you say no, then I don't know if we can have both. And then right now, I just don't think they're a playoff team. I think this is a year where we change culture. I think this is where we change expectation. You have a bunch of guys coming in that have been in past cultures that expected you to win. Can you carry that over to Seattle, or is the culture there that doesn't really have those expectations too strong for those players to really overcome until you completely change personnel?
They're in the battle to make the playoffs team.
That's what I think. I think this is a team that could be in the hunt right until the very last couple of days. I think I can see them. Some circumstances happen where they miss out by 3 points. I can see it being that kind of close of a battle. But they're a team that's in position to make a move positively at the deadline. They're still competitive by the deadline. They're still looking to make a playoff spot, a run for a playoff spot by the deadline, in my opinion.
With what money?
Well, that's the thing. That's what I said. They're gonna have to make some moves. they're gonna have to make some moves throughout the year. I believe there will be trades being made, and I think as we see guys emerge, that's why I said the goaltending is something to look out for. If Joey Decord can jump out of camp and be a guy that all of a sudden looks like he can be a number one guy, that we may not be talking about Philip Grubauer on this team, because with 3 years and $5.9 million left, he's an attractive enough asset with teams need goaltending. They can make a flip around, and all of a sudden Decord's now the number one for this team, and they have some cap space for it. So I think there's some flexibility. It's everything's got to line up properly for Seattle in order to make this work. And I think there's some things that will go well for them, but ultimately, yeah, they're going to fall short on the playoff race. And I think it might be because they're so hamstrung against it as far as financials go.
Yep, that's a fair point. May have been, you probably have already figured it out based on what I said earlier about Seattle in this video, but I'll just clarify it for sure. I am relatively confident in them being a better offensive team this year, higher scoring team. I'm relatively confident in that, but I'm not confident in that translating to being a playoff team. Not yet with the Seattle Kraken, and especially, again, because of the product of the division and the conference they're in. But very interesting team to watch as Dan Bylsma returns behind the bench in the NHL as a head coach. There you have it, the Seattle Kraken, Alex B. Smith, Dana Lane, I'm Ian Cameron. 32 teams in 32 days rolls along right here on the Ice Guys.